And the Oscar
goes to...
The Oscars, the pinnacle of Hollywood recognition, is often seen as a glittering celebration of the best in filmmaking. However, behind the scenes, the Academy Awards have been the backdrop for countless controversial moments. One of the most notable is Richard Gere's exclusion from the Oscars for 2 decades after a daring political statement he made during the 1993 ceremony.
We could all kind of send love and truth and a kind of sanity to Deng Xiaoping right now in Beijing, that he will take his troops and take the Chinese away from Tibet and allow these people to live as free, independent people again.
It wasn't an off-the-cuff remark, but a deliberate and bold speech that not only shocked the audience, but also set the stage for a long-standing ban on the actor from Hollywood's most prestigious event. Let's dive deep into the controversy that led to Richard Gere being banned from the Oscars and the lasting effects it had on his career. When Richard Gere appeared at the 1993 Academy Awards, he was a superstar, with films like Pretty Woman, American Gigolo, and An Officer and a Gentleman under his belt. Gere was at the peak of his Hollywood fame. His inclusion as a presenter for the Best Art Direction category seemed like a no-brainer. A sex symbol with charm and critical acclaim, he had all the attributes that the Academy loved to spotlight during its biggest night. But instead of sticking to the typical scripted presentation, Gere used his stage time to address a political issue that was deeply personal to him: the plight of Tibet and the human rights abuses taking place in China. As the broadcast aired to millions of viewers, Gere took a moment to speak directly to Chinese leader Deng Xiaoping, urging him to free Tibet and end the occupation. His comments were blunt, impassioned, and entirely unexpected for such a high-profile event, since a billion people could be watching the Oscars, and since this broadcast is being shown in China, Deng Xiaoping could be watching right now with his children and his grandchildren. Gere began, before diving into a speech about the Chinese government's human rights violations in Tibet. He asked the audience to send love, truth, and kind of sanity to Deng Xiaoping, imploring him to allow the Tibetan people to live freely. Gere's words were both a call for justice and an impassioned plea for human rights, making his stance clear for all to hear. While Gere's comments received a warm round of applause from the audience present at the Oscars, the reaction backstage was far less favorable. The producer of the Oscars that year, Gil Cates, was reportedly furious at Gere's remarks. In the immediate aftermath, Cates made it known that he was displeased with the actor's decision to use the Oscar stage to make a political statement, rather than focusing on the celebration of the film industry. In an interview with the Los Angeles Times, Cates labeled Gere's speech as arrogant and distasteful. He was quoted saying, "Does anyone care about Richard Gere's comments about China? It's arrogant. For someone who I invite to present an award, to use that time to postulate a personal political belief, it's outrageous, it's distasteful, and it's dishonest." He went on to state that Gere, along with fellow presenters Tim Robbins and Susan Sarandon, who had used their time on stage to address the crisis involving Haitian refugees, would not be invited back to the Oscars. At the time, the Academy was focused on maintaining its image as a non-political entity, and Gere's comments threatened to disrupt that carefully curated reputation. In the years that followed, Gere was effectively blacklisted from the Oscars, with no invite extending to him for the next 2 decades. Richard Gere's outspoken political activism did not stop at his Oscar speech. The actor, a longtime Buddhist and human rights advocate, continued to speak out about the situation in Tibet and China, co-founding Tibet House in 1987. His commitment to the cause was unwavering, and he continued to use his platform to raise awareness about the oppression facing the Tibetan people. However, Gere's decision to speak out against China came at a significant cost. Hollywood, especially as the Chinese market began to grow exponentially in importance in the late 1990s and early 2000s, was less inclined to cast someone with such a controversial reputation in the eyes of the Chinese government. According to Gere, his career was affected by the political stance he took, with the actor revealing in a 2017 interview that he was frequently denied roles due to his outspoken views. In some cases, films he had already shot were buried or not released in China because his involvement would harm the movie's prospects at the box office. In a 2017 interview with The Hollywood Reporter, Gere shared the extent to which his career had been impacted, revealing that he had been told that producers couldn't finance films with him involved because it would upset the Chinese. He went on to explain that a director he wanted to work with had even dropped out of a film 2 weeks before shooting, citing concerns about the repercussions on his ability to work in China if he collaborated with Gere. "I had a secret phone call with the director on a protected line," Gere said. "If I worked with this director, his family would never leave the country again, and he would never work. The Chinese government would ensure that." This revelation illustrated the harsh reality that Gere faced due to his activism, with his career being constrained by external forces that were largely out of his control. While Gere's political speech at the 1993 Oscars may have been the catalyst for his blacklisting, some argue that it was more than just a clash of ideals. It was a reflection of Hollywood's complicated relationship with China. In the years following his speech, the Chinese market became increasingly important for Hollywood's bottom line. Movies like The Dark Knight, 2008, and Iron Man 3, 2013 earned millions in Chinese box office revenue, and studios began to cater to the country's demands, including avoiding any films or actors that could alienate the Chinese government. Given the growing significance of China in the entertainment industry, it's not difficult to understand why the Academy, and by extension Hollywood, would want to distance themselves from Richard Gere. The Oscars are, after all, an awards show that relies heavily on sponsorship, advertising, and global appeal, all of which would be jeopardized if China refused to allow films featuring Gere to be shown. In this sense, the ban on Gere can be seen not just as a political punishment for his views, but also as a strategic move to preserve Hollywood's lucrative relationship with China. Despite the initial backlash, Gere eventually returned to the Oscars in 2013. By that time, China's hold on Hollywood had only grown stronger, and Gere's presence at the ceremony seemed almost like a quiet nod to the passing of time. Gere himself acknowledged the absurdity of the ban, remarking, "It seems if you stay around long enough, they forget they've banned you." However, while the actor's return to the Oscars signaled the end of his formal exclusion, it was clear that the lasting consequences of his political speech had shaped his career in ways that would never fully be undone. Gere continued to make films, but his focus shifted toward independent projects, away from the glitzy blockbuster world that often catered to China's tastes. He embraced roles in character-driven films and stayed true to his activism, despite the challenges that came with it. His absence from major Hollywood films, particularly those seeking international box office success, speaks volumes about the entertainment industry's continued struggle to balance artistic expression with the pressures of international markets. Gere's experience is a testament to the harsh realities of speaking out in an era where global box office revenue and international politics intersect. As we look back on the events of 1993 and the years that followed, it's clear that Richard Gere's banishment from the Oscars was more than just about his political speech. It was a reflection of the growing power of global politics in shaping Hollywood's decisions. Gere may have been ahead of his time in speaking out about China's treatment of Tibet, but the cost was undeniably steep. While the actor may not have received the accolades he deserved for some of his later work, he remains an iconic figure who has never shied away from standing up for what he believes in. His time away from the Oscars also highlights a troubling trend in Hollywood, the tendency to silence voices that challenge the status quo, especially when those voices conflict with lucrative international markets. But as the industry continues to evolve, one has to wonder, could Richard Gere's experience have played a role in shaping the future of Hollywood's response to political activism in the entertainment world? Now that the dust has settled, how do you feel about Gere's speech at the Oscars? Do you think his ban was justified, or do you believe he was unfairly punished for his beliefs? Let's dive into the discussion below and explore the wider implications of this fascinating chapter in Oscar history.